Today I'm going to start off a three-part series, which will be looking at a particular character in the Bible and going forth from there, which I've dubbed. If this will work. Can you move it up to the next slide or move the focus onto the PowerPoint? Awesome. So I've dubbed this series "Let It Out." Let it out. And so my apologies to Brother Pete for stepping upon his open series. So the tagline I've got for this first one is Open Secrets. Well, I encourage you to check out Brother Pete's open series, particularly last week's Open Grave one. It's a great treat. So the Open Secret. So, but first of all, I'm going to ask you, and next slide again, please, Kate. That'll be one. Awesome sauce. Okay. So what differences are there in between what people said back in the 80s, Gen Zers, compared to today? What differences are there in what people said? So to get you started, for example, I might say, back in the 80s, I would say, I've checked all 4 channels and there's nothing on TV. Oh, that was it? Wow, living life on the edge there. Just showing up at someone's house. Another thing, actually, would be remembering like 1,000 phone numbers in your head. I could still remember my home phone number from like 30-odd years ago. Veronica? Download routes on the AA maps. Oh my! I remember when I got my first car, Ford Fiesta. This little thing which just go around. I would have to print off like all those kind of documents and everything. If I take one step wrong with it, I'm getting lost everywhere. So I have to make sure that you're following those routes meticulously. Rena? So true. I had a buddy of mine when I was growing up back in primary school. He only lived like about 3 blocks away. But yeah, I got used to following the A to Z. And in fact, yesterday, when Kerry and I we were just driving around, and we saw this kid who kind of been older than 10, just like running by himself. And Kerry was shocked. And I was thinking, back in my day, not a problem. I'm sure like at 7 or 8 years old, I'd be just like happily walking across other neighbourhoods and so forth. Another phrase which has gone out the window. Let's go out to rent a movie or something. Times like Blockbuster and all that. I see. A phone box. You say that, and I can immediately smell what it's like as well. One more. Oh, 2 more then. Go on, Pete. Buying a single. I'm No, I miss buying a single and actually having like the kind of the B-side on it and like the lyrics sheet inside it as well. But one more, Marie. Oh, Marie, did you have one? And damaged, yes. The phone box is always damaged, but yeah. So when we look at these kind of things, we have a kind of sense of like nostalgia, even if we know that things weren't as good back then. We look upon it fondly, but then if our past selves could see what the life that we'd have now, we would like kind of yearn for that. Which brings us to our character. One not often we've looked at too often, but Habakkuk. So Habakkuk is I'd almost dub him like the most minor of the minor prophets. When I'm having to try and find it, I'm having to like kind of go through the song each time. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk. There we go. So yeah, kind of nestled in just between Malachi and Psalms thereabouts. And so a bit of background. So it was written between 612 and 587 BC, just before the final diaspora dispersion of the Jewish people from their homelands, for the reasons of which are actually given within the book. It's set in Judah. So by way of background with this, the Kingdom of Israel After having gone through a prosperous golden age between Saul, David, and Solomon, it split off into a northern territory of Israel and then the southern part of Judah. And the northern part, by this point, had already been taken over by the Assyrians. It's possible that Habakkuk possibly knew the other prophets, Zephaniah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. And I love when little cameos appear, like with characters within different books, particularly like between Ezra and Nehemiah. You see the prophets just pop up in those ones. Albeit Habakkuk doesn't actually appear is not referenced specifically by name in any other book in the Bible, but he does actually appear in the apocryphal book Bel and the Dragon, where it's said that he fed Daniel in the lion's den. So it's an apocryphal book, so don't put too much stock in it, but it's interesting to see the kind of viewpoints of the writers back then as to the prophets at the time. And one last bit of background is that he ministered during the reign of Jehoiakim, which is essentially what the premise of the book is about. So we have King Josiah, who'd ruled Judah, and he brought around this great spiritual revival across the land. He'd got the Jewish people to book up their ideas, cast out all the idols and so forth. But then we have Jehoiakim, which was a puppet king installed by Egypt, which ruled terribly. So Habakkuk, he just like how we viewed earlier, he was like looking back at the good old days. He thought about where Judah had been, and the kind of state of the nation as it was then. So, getting right into it. So, the first verse of Habakkuk, it reads that it was the burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see. So, a burden. This was something which was weighing upon Habakkuk's heart. That this wasn't just an oracle. It wasn't just a message, which some Bible translations actually refer to it as. Sometimes so it might even refer to it as an pronouncement. But this was a burden that he had. The actual Hebrew for it is masor, which certainly indicates a weighing down. So when Habakkuk was looking across the land, this was something that was heavily upon him. Now this contrasts, quite interestingly, with other prophets. Other prophets, they would get a message from God and essentially just relay it across the nation. And it's essentially just kind of a get yourself sorted or else. But this is actually quite the opposite. Habakkuk was actually seeing the state of the people. He's bringing up their concerns and he's bringing them to God. Actually, quite a reversal of what a general prophet would go by. So this was a general concern that he had for the people. And certainly the book of Habakkuk, it actually reads a bit like a psalm, particularly Habakkuk's parts, in that it's him unburdening himself to the Lord. And essentially, a lot of it is Habakkuk's complaining. The next few verses read, O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? Even cry out unto thee of violence, and that thou wilt not save. Why dost thou show me iniquity, and cause me to behold grievance? For spoiling and violence are before me, and there are that which raise up strife and contention. Therefore the law is slack, and judgment doth never go forth, for the wicked doth compass about the righteous. Therefore wrong judgment proceedeth. So it starts off by saying, how long shall I see these people which have fallen away? How long shall I see all this sin and this corrupt leadership and so forth? How long? So this isn't the first time Habakkuk has brought his complaints towards the Lord. Here he is, just once again, banging on God's door. How long is this going to be going on for? What's happening here? And yet, God isn't answering. Habakkuk goes on to address some of his concerns. He sees violence around. He sees judges acting inappropriately. He sees sinful people getting away with crimes and everything. Despite the fact this was written in the 6th to 7th century BC, human nature doesn't change. Violence, wickedness, corruption, ill law, that continues today. Remember, in fact, is it just yesterday, I think, or the day before, I read an article about this massive riot that was going on in Wolverhampton, kids with knives. Star City, or as some of my friends call it, Stab City these days, which is a cinema complex just down the road. Kids with machetes there. And just generally, we see like kind of just general wickedness going across the nation in society. Other concerns we might have, Ukraine, not quite on our doorstep, but certainly close enough to cause a problem. And of course, we have concern for the people there. Inflation, just to bring it even more closer to home. Prices just continuing to rise like crazy. Petrol prices, fuel prices, utility bills. Corrupt leadership. I'm not even sure. Like we've got like CEOs and like just kind of raking in their millions and so forth, while the elderly struggle, why we have homeless people. Political uncertainty. I'm not even sure if we've got a prime minister right now, but and then who knows what September's going to bring. Climate change, Brexit, and just general immorality. Back like say 60 years ago, there was like the Profumo affair. This massive scandal which rocks the higher tiers of government. If such a scandal happens today, it's not even going to hit like page 3 or page 4. So, and if it did, it's just going to be overtaken by the next scandal. It just seems to be the way that political business is done these days. And certainly too often, and not just on the political or business scene, moral leaders tend to fail us, or religious leaders not exempt. We see the rich, powerful, and connected people getting away with tax evasion, influencing politics, while just generally people seem to struggle. This is a kind of similar thing that Habakkuk had. He's looking around and saying, God, we can see all the problems here, can't you? Why aren't you doing anything? Is your inaction actually causing like sin to increase, so forth? Like God, Habakkuk saying, you don't seem to care about this. And I can be honest, I've asked this of God myself sometimes as well. Sometimes you don't seem to care about our predicaments, our issues, things that we see around us, things which are hitting us close to home. Why do good people die young? Why do questionable people seem to get promoted? Why do non-Christian people actually seem to succeed in various areas of life, whether it's business, relationships, marriage, in health, while the people who follow God seem to struggle? This is the open secret, is that following God doesn't necessarily exempt us from this perfect, easy, easy life to be able to get through with things. So I'm going to put this question to ourselves, just rhetorical, but something that you can ask yourselves in your own time. Where do we turn to when we're concerned with the world around us? My habit is to actually just go to Google for answers, try and figure out the underlying problems, try and figure out what's next, try and kind of predict, and I'm not going to say I'm prophet, but try and work out what's coming on down the line. I do go to Facebook or Twitter looking for an echo chamber to validate our concerns, or even to try and find opposing views just to get ourselves kind of riled up. And perhaps TikTok or YouTube or TV for distraction. Conspiracy sites to validate our opinion. Friends and family for that same reason. But any of these can kind of lead us down a rabbit hole, yielding more questions and answers, giving perplexity rather than peace. Habakkuk's approach is that if we have a burden, to take it to the Lord. It might take a while. It might be just like continually us complaining to God day in, day out, until we actually get that answer. Then what is our response to sin? When others act immorally and succeed, are we prepared to ignore our convictions, or are we prepared to call them out on it? Are we prepared to ease off on our convictions because when we see what methods succeed, or will we remain steadfast, following the Lord in the way that He's decided, to make sure that we do things according to His law, His purpose? Habakkuk also goes on to ask, how do we stand against injustice? He's talking about how judgments seems to be weighed against those who actually seem to follow the law, while those who break it just seem to get away with it. He asks, does the law actually accomplish its purpose? And certainly, like in 2020, just a couple of years back, we saw this in a more relevant way. When it came to like vaccines, when it came to masks, came to lack of social interaction, were we prepared to follow that law, even when the lawmakers themselves actually break the laws that they created? At these times, it's even more incumbent upon us to follow those laws, the rules, responsibly, respectfully, and to act lawfully. By way of example, Jesus, when he was going through his trial, he followed the rules to the T. He allowed himself to be passed from pillar to post between the various leaders. He allowed himself to be flogged. He allowed himself to carry the cross and to die upon it, following the execution laws of the land, even though at any point he could have used his power to stop that. And in the end, the only law that he did break was that of death. So there's the idea that when we stand against injustice, that we still continue to follow the law as best as we can. But eventually, God does respond. But you say amen, it wasn't actually in a great way. So God's response was, "Behold ye among the heathen, and regard, and wonder marvelously, for I will work a work in your days, which you will not believe, though it be told you." So let's break this down, because this actually summarizes what God ends up talking to Habakkuk for the rest of the book about. First of all, he's saying, look around you. Habakkuk has given all these reasons, all these frustrations, all these complaints. And God's essentially saying, you're looking at this like in a two-dimensional kind of mindset. God's looking at this not just in a three-dimensional, he's looking four-dimensional as well. He's looking through across time, seeing where Israel has been, where he wants to get his people to, what kind of circumstances are going to end up leading to the Messiah, and to this present time. So while Habakkuk's just focused on his immediate surroundings, he's not looking at the bigger picture. God's also saying you're going to be impressed that even when Habakkuk didn't understand it all, you need to take comfort in knowing that God was going to be in control. And God said, he's already planning a work. Habakkuk's pleas hadn't gone on deaf ears. God was already at work in this. And God's saying, if you'd been paying attention, you'd have seen the answers, that this was already coming into play now. And I'll try to summarize it, but even the King James does it just as effectively. You won't believe me, even if I told you. Usually, when we pray, we got kind of a broad idea of what the answer to prayer is. Sometimes we even kind of ask it very specifically, as if God might miss something. Like the time I asked, I followed Joshua's prayer to be bold and be strong. Afterwards, I made sure to be very specific about what I meant by be bold. But what if God answers prayer in a way that we don't expect? Something that's not going to cause immediate benefit, but cause short-term pain, even if in the long term it's going to be going to work effectively. Sorry. And interestingly, this verse itself was actually quoted by Paul. In Acts 13:41, he quotes this verse very specifically, where he warned the Jewish people that salvation was going to be available to all, not just to them. That God was doing a work that they wouldn't believe, even though God was telling them right to their face. So he goes on to say, "For lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land, to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity shall proceed of themselves. Their horses are also swifter than the leopards, and are more fierce than the evening wolves. And their horsemen shall spread themselves, and their horsemen shall come from far. They shall fly as the eagle that hasteth to eat. They shall come all for violence. Their faces shall sup up as the east wind, and they shall gather the captivity as the sand. And they shall scoff at the kings, and the princes shall be a scorn unto them. They shall deride every stronghold, for they shall heap dust and take it. Then shall his mind change, and he shall pass over and offend, imputing this power unto his God." All right, so there's a lot there. Let's dissect it. So God's saying, first of all, that he was going to raise up the Chaldeans, which was kind of a subset, a branch of the Babylonians, which is he calls them a bitter and hasty nation. So Habakkuk all this time he's been saying, we're in trouble. Your people are suffering. What is going on? And then God's answer is, yeah, I'm going to raise up an army to destroy Judah. You call that an answer? We're in trouble, so you're going to send something worse. But yes, within this, we see that God has already been working. Imagine what it would have taken for this political scene to be maneuvered, to be structured in such a way, getting the Babylonians to be raised up in a particular strength, to get their technology to such a state, to get the Assyrians lax, to get essentially just all the nations just in a particular way until this time. So God had not only just been planning a work, he'd already been working. And that's Habakkuk's answers to prayer, and certainly ours, may not be a simple A to B. Sometimes it goes from A all the way to Z, with multiple aspects needing to come into the position on the chessboard of our lives. Where it just might be just God wanting to waiting for us to acquire some kind of knowledge, acquire particular friendships, dispel certain friendships or relationships. There's all these various aspects in our lives that God's working towards, which before we get like kind of the full answer to prayer. That in the immediate term God's going to answer, but then in the long term there'll still be a work to be done. And that's that the answer to prayer is not always going to be the final answer, but that God might actually use ungodly people to help us. So within this, we have the Babylonians, which were an ungodly nation, which are going to help. But yet, this is just to kind of help the godly people, which reminds me of the Good Samaritan, help coming from an unexpected source, not necessarily condoning that source, but nonetheless, that God was working in that particular way. And certainly, as I alluded to before, sometimes as Christians, we have this kind of sense of automatic entitlement that things should always go well, that when we pray for a particular way, that immediately it's going to be a good response. Imagine if we're praying about our job and we say, God, I'm not being paid enough, my colleagues are annoying, I'm getting stressed with this. Can you help me with this job? And then God answers and says, okay, that's fine, I'm going to take you out of your job. Awesome. And then what? You'll get me another job? No, I didn't say I was going to get you another job. I'm going to take you out of that job. But this is where we need to trust God, that even if we don't understand it, even if this is still kind of a partial answer to prayer in the short term, that we know that God is working a great work, and we still need to just trust and see it as an answer to prayer, even if it's going to kind of cause that kind of short-term pain. So essentially, just to trust Him. And going forth, although He was using an ungodly nation, not once within it does He actually condone their way of life. And likewise, that God can use anyone around us to facilitate blessings, bankers, lawyers, medical staff, car dealers, so forth. That God can use anyone around us. It might not just be like a sister from the church giving a scripture, may not be a brother from the church giving that word of support. That God can use anyone around us when we're praying for help to work in our lives. And then the last part of this, God saying that the Chaldeans' mind, that they'd change, that they'd pass over, imputing His power unto His God. So the Chaldeans' approach was to essentially just to conquer a land and then just move on. Totally contrary to what God's manner of things is, that He was the provider, that the nation of Israel would be satisfied with what they had. When it came to like expansion of territory and so forth, God never did it for the sake of it. His idea was always for that the nation of Israel, for the nation of Judah, to always be dependent on Him, the Jehovah Jireh, to supply His needs, to supply the people's needs, as opposed to these people which would just like looking for the next thing. And those people, they imputed their power unto their as their God. They considered that their own strength, their own military might, was their God. So in contrast, do we look at where our skills lie? Perhaps it's in public speaking, in creativity, music, coding. And while we might be impressed with how God has used others within our lives, even your godly people, that we don't emulate them, but rather that we continue to be satisfied with remembering what God has provided for us. So remembering that every skill, every ability that we have comes from the Lord. So just to close up, that in your next prayer time, or just going forward, consider, what are your concerns? What do you see in the world around you which distresses you, which troubles you? What are your complaints? A lot of times we continue to ask God for things. We tend to intercede. Are we prepared to interrogate God? Are we prepared to say, we see all these issues, what are you doing about them? Are you paying attention? As Habakkuk shows, we're allowed to challenge God, albeit respectfully, and be prepared that God's going to answer the prayers in a way that we might not expect. So when we have an answer to prayer, even though things are going to be troublesome in the short term, trust God, knowing that He's got a long-term plan in your lives. All right, I'm going to hand over to Pete now. God bless you all, in Jesus' name.